Did your child experience significant learning loss during school closures? Do you believe that your child has in some way not received their free and appropriate education? If you answer yes to these questions, and you are in the right place, welcome again to another episode of Thriving Special Families. I'm your host, Crystal Sanford, and I have the pleasure of having two wonderful guests with me today. We have special education attorneys, Amanda Selogie and Vickie Brett. Hello, ladies.
Hi, Crystal.
Thank you so much for being here as we discuss our topic today, compensatory education. Where are we now? Families, if you're engaging with us with the podcast, then welcome. If you are watching live, we are so happy to have you. Feel free to leave your comments or questions in the comment section, and we'll do our best to answer those along the way. And lastly, always remember that the information that is shared is for your informational purposes only. If you're in need of medical or legal advice, please do ask a professional in that area. So again, our topic today is compensatory education. And if you're not really sure what that means, we're going to dive into that today and let you know a little bit more about that and how that might apply to your child. Again, we're so happy to have our attorneys here today. Amanda Selogie received her degree in Child and Adolescent Development, specializing in education at California State University, Northridge, which is one of my alma maters. Woo-hoo. Yay. And she also got her Juris Doctorate from Whittier Law School. While at Whittier Law School, Amanda was a fellow in the prestigious Center for Children's Rights Fellowship Program, and she served in the school's pro bono special education clinic and as a research editor of the Journal of Child and Family Advocacy. And then also we have Vickie Brett. Vickie was born and raised in Southern California. She attended UC Riverside and she received a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science with a minor in philosophy before becoming a very active Whittier Law School student and alumnus. And so I believe you guys both met there in law school at Whittier Law School.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I really am one who values story, and I really always want to honor and share more and hear more about people's stories. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what led you guys to become special education attorneys.
Absolutely. So I kind of fell into it. I kind of fell into the area of law in general. I really thought I was going to be a special education teacher. I was on that path. I worked in college at a 1 in a million full inclusion elementary school where I had the privilege of working with kids with special needs, and particularly one student that just, melted my heart, a little boy with Down syndrome who, one of the best memories I have of him is we would work on one of his goals of 3-word sentences. And one day he was really struggling with behaviors and we were trying to redirect him, and he looks up at me and he says, "I love you." And it was just such an amazing moment to see the progress being made and the connection and the way I felt about these students. I knew I wanted to work with these students, but I saw firsthand so many struggles that families had. The school I worked at was a charter school that it had a wait list of hundreds of kids long, and these kids were lucky to be there because it was full inclusion, and not all families get that benefit. And I kind of figured out through, my aunt's a special ed teacher, and we're talking with the families that I worked with, that this was just not something that was an easy path, that a lot of teachers face a lot of red tape and are only able to do so much. So it just kind of fell into place that I found out it was an area of law, and I'd always been told to go to law school, and I fought it, and yet it kind of fell into my lap. And now I'm so grateful for it because I do love working with these families, and I'm able to do it in a way that I feel was kind of made for me in a way. And in law school, I met Vickie, and we were able to, kind of build our practice from there.
Oh, that's beautiful. And Vickie, tell us a little bit more about what led you to law.
Yeah, I had a bit of a different path. I have a cousin on the spectrum, so I grew up kind of knowing a little bit about special education, IEPs, and things like that. But I had gone to law school. I was going to be an environmental law attorney. I'm dating myself by saying, an Aaron Brockovich, if you will. And I had a fellowship with Orange County Coastkeeper, which was fabulous in my third year. But I realized it was just a lot more writing, and I'm a people person. And I speak Spanish as well, so I wasn't able to really use that as I had used it in prior internships that I'd had. So I'd been an intern at the public counsel's guardianship clinic, so I helped. I was in the area of helping families. And I met Amanda. Well, we had gone to law school. She was a year below me. And we really got to know each other studying abroad in Spain. And she said, "Oh, I'm in this clinic. We should have a class together. Why don't you join this class?" And so I needed a couple units. So I was like, for sure. And we ended up not even being in the same class. They pulled me from the special education clinic in LA to go to the Orange County. And I really fell in love with it. And the advisors there had their own boutique law firm. So they had hired me after law school. So I was doing special education. And then I briefly did a little bit of family law. Obviously, special education had my heart. And then Amanda and I came together 7 years ago to start our own law firm. And here we are.
Wow, that's amazing. It's always so amazing to see how, what they say, 6-7 degrees of separation, right? Like how we're all kind of connected. And although your stories were very different, it kind of led you to the same space now where you can support families in this powerful way. So that's really wonderful. As we're going to talk today about compensatory education, and I know that's one of the features that you help and support families with. Can you kind of help us have a working definition of what is compensatory education?
Sure. So compensatory education is designed to put the student in the place they would have been had the student not been deprived of special education and related services. So essentially, there's a violation of their free and appropriate public education. The student does not receive certain services and are now harmed in some way, whether it's they've regressed or they're unable to access their education. So the law has put this as a remedy that is designed to put this child back in the place they should have been. So we talk a lot about what can it be, and it can be a number of things. There's not, one form of it. But the idea is that we're not just making up hours. We're really trying to put the child back in a place that they should have been. So if they should have been making progress, then they should be at that forward progress, not just back, if they regress, not just back to where they were, but also that forward progress.
It's an equitable remedy, so it could take the form of educational services or reimbursement to the parent for providing private services. So those are the kind of two main categories that parents are able to kind of visualize.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And in the idea under COVID, we have had some guidance from the Department of Education as to compensatory education in light of COVID. And the Department of Ed has essentially said that an award of compensatory education does not require a finding of negligence or fault. So because, the COVID-19 pandemic and the required school closures are not the fault of the school district. And we hear that a lot by schools, like, hey, it's not our fault. However, it's still a learning loss that occurred, and the child is still going to be entitled to compensatory education. So it's going to be a little bit different with regards to COVID.
And that's really great for parents to know, as I know there are many parents who, watch their child struggle, depending on the school district, maybe they did get access to some in-person learning. Maybe they didn't, maybe not for all school year. One of our districts was closed the entire school year. They were online. So I know that's impacted children in many different ways. But my next question is, how do parents typically, or what are they doing to get access to compensatory education? We know that it's why it occurs because there is a learning loss or there is a fault, some negligence. What do they need to do to get access to that?
So I think in the context of COVID, we've had to think a little bit differently about comp ed. So as Amanda had alluded, at least here in California, the Department of Education had kind of outlined back in April 2020, and we haven't had any new guidance, but the guidance was, once those kiddos are back in person, essentially in person, a school district can try to address the regression that the child may have had. And I mean, we believe every single child regressed during the last year and a half. One of the ways that can be done, that a lot of times districts, even pre-COVID, relied on were assessments, right? So one of the things that we have encouraged a lot of parents is to hold IEP meetings. Whether you have an annual at the beginning of the year or not, you make that request for that IEP meeting, you indicate all your concerns, the regression and things like that, and you just straight up ask, what compensatory education are we going to have in order to get the child to where the child needs to be? So we've already seen that in a couple of the 30-day IEP meetings that we've had, where they're offering additional speech and language, right? Speech and language online is just not what it was when it's in person. So we have seen some stuff from the districts willing to, provide extra sessions. But then we've also seen the other side that maybe Amanda can talk a little bit about in terms of like us filing for compensatory education.
Yeah. And so after school resumes in person, the IEP team has this discussion. And in some instances, the school, like Vickie said, is going to provide an offer. But just because they provide an offer doesn't mean that that's the only thing the parents can accept. In fact, I have a case right now where the school district offered 20 hours. And this is a student who didn't access anything for an entire school year. Clearly, 20 hours is not sufficient for that child. So in the event where the school offers nothing, or the event where the school offers something, but it's not adequate, parents have the same recourse as they would for any other violation or denial of faith. Unfortunately, that does mean going through some type of alternative dispute resolution, mediation, or due process. And it's going to be very similar to how they would remedy any disputes, even, prior to COVID. Some schools we've seen are doing a lot more to try to do alternative dispute resolutions. They're willing to talk with the families about how to resolve. But we are seeing that we want to make sure that parents are very careful, because in those discussions, there is a lot of talk about waivers of claims. And we want to make sure that parents aren't leaving things on the table. So if you're having those negotiations with the school district and they're saying, okay, we offered you 20 hours, you wanted 50. Okay, we're going to compromise and give you 40 or 35, but we want you to waive all the claims for the past 2 years. That may not be appropriate, because there might be issues outside of COVID, or maybe 40 hours really isn't enough. Maybe the 50 or even more is appropriate. Maybe there's other things that need to be resolved. So, we are seeing that these alternative dispute resolutions sometimes are leaning in the favor of the school districts, because they kind of hold that power. So if a family does proceed with a due process, one, they kind of have the leverage of being able to state their claims, not just to COVID related issues, but non-COVID related issues.
Wow, this is really powerful. I just want us to catch for parents who are just joining us. Welcome again to another episode of Thriving Special Families, where our topic today is compensatory education. Where are we now? And especially in the light of COVID. And then also always know that our show is sponsored by Sanford Autism Consulting, helping you advocate for the education your child deserves. If you're in need of IEP resources, definitely check out our website, sdautismhelp.com/resources. So what I'm hearing from you ladies is that there are options that parents have if they believe that their child is experiencing regression, if there was learning loss, especially in light of COVID. One is to, it sounds like, just start with an IEP meeting.
Yep.
And that's often what I tell parents as well, as I advocate for parents, is starting with the IEP meeting, seeing what kind of resolve you can bring at the IEP table is always a good point. And it's always nice also because you can get at least their offer in writing, so that we know what they are willing to do and not do. And then you can decide how to move forward. And then it looks like alternative dispute resolution, mediation, these kinds of meetings might be an alternative might work for a parent, but then also knowing not to waive or release your rights, not to consent to things that you're not really 100% sure of, is something parents should be aware of as well.
Absolutely. And I think something else that we're starting to see as well is the additional funding that a lot of the school districts receive.
Yes.
So over the summer, we saw a lot of people be given enrichment programs. That's what they were calling kind of like their summer school. And I think it's important for parents because, sometimes I'll have parents and they're like, oh, well, we got this. And, I don't want to ask for too much. And it's not, it's what you're entitled to and the rights that you have. And that was something that may have been provided to all students.
Yes.
So it wasn't necessarily tailored to meet the unique needs of your child. It was just kind of this maybe computer program for reading intervention or something like that. And your child has, specific rights to be able to be provided a free and appropriate public education. And appropriate is where we all deal with, right? What is appropriate? And that may have been appropriate for a typical kiddo. And it doesn't mean that your child didn't make improvements, but there's other things that, you are still entitled to and to ask for. And so I don't want parents, when they get that pushback, or maybe the district's not trying to make them feel guilty, but then a parent inevitably will. There's no harm in asking, especially if you believe that your child regressed. And a lot of children did not make appropriate progress on their goals. And it's not just, it is what it is. No, it's not. we can make it better.
And we're seeing that argument a lot from schools saying, well, everyone was impacted by COVID and distance learning. Everybody regressed. Everybody. But the U.S. Department of Education has actually come out, and many of the circuits across the United States have come out and said, no, that's not an excuse. Students on IEPs have a right to FAPE. The school districts have an obligation to provide FAPE. And they have certain goals in their IEP. If they are not making meaningful progress during this time, they are entitled to commensurate education. It does not matter if every kid in IEP in your school district also regressed. And it also doesn't matter if every kid in the class, gen ed or otherwise, regressed and struggled. These students on IEPs have certain rights and protections. And none of those rights and protections were waived during COVID. In fact, many school districts, like Vickie mentioned, were receiving substantial additional funding for COVID specifically. And many of them were supposed to use that funding during distance learning to provide these enrichment programs to make sure that students didn't regress. And unfortunately, a lot of those programs didn't exist, or they were provided to everybody, and students on IEPs were not able to access because they did not receive their additional supports. So, these excuses that we're seeing schools say are not appropriate excuses.
Yeah. This is really powerful. And this is something I hear from parents a lot. I teach an IEP class for parents monthly, and I hear parents say, and I talk about, parent pitfalls that parents experience. And one of them is, being too friendly and being so accommodating and, well, I understand my kid is, hard to manage or, I know everybody was going through a hard time. But what you're saying is those are not excuses, and that really can hinder your advocacy for your child.
Absolutely. And we can hold both spaces. We have space for both. Wonderful. We can acknowledge that it's been hard for everyone, but an individualized education plan or program meeting is about the individual child that is in front of you. And that's something that we have heard from a lot of parents is that, you get that well-meaning, APE teacher or just, somebody else on the team saying, well, I have a kid with X, right? And it's like, thank you for sharing, but this is a completely different situation. And I think that even when we try to make it seem like everybody's been having a hard time, it comes off not good for a lot of parents. And it does inhibit their advocacy, especially if they're by themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Which is what we say. Don't IEP alone. Don't go alone. Definitely have someone with you. even if it's your regional center caseworker, or if it's, an advocate, a neighbor, any babysitter, anybody. Yeah, a friend, someone. So as we have parents who may be listening and they're thinking, wow, this sounds like it totally is relevant to my child. What would you guys recommend, ladies, as the next steps for a parent if they are really considering that compensatory education might be appropriate for their child?
Well, the first step is that IEP meeting. So, if you've already been back in person at least 30 days, we recommend having an IEP meeting to talk about how the student has been functioning during distance learning and how they're doing now that they've returned to in person, and gather as much information as possible, and straight out ask how the IEP team is planning on addressing regression, how they're planning on providing compensatory education. So that's step one. Find out if they're willing to play ball, so to speak. Gather that information. And one caution we would make is at these IEP meetings, we are seeing some teams that are saying, considering the circumstances, Sally actually is doing a lot, so well, or better than expected, or yeah, she regressed, but now that she's back in person, she's, back on her trajectory. Just because these things are said at that IEP meeting does not necessarily make them true. Without more evidence to support that statement is only a statement. So we recommend asking for work samples, asking for informal or formal data collection or assessments to be conducted, because someone's statement that they think the student is now functioning okay really means nothing, because what is their idea of okay, and is their perception kind of off, considering a lot of these students are starting back in person at the beginning of the school year, which means they have new teachers that have never seen them before. So how can they compare them to how they were before COVID and how they were during COVID? It's very difficult to have that comparison if you weren't in both situations. Who is in all situations? The parent. The parent knows best. So if you do feel like what they're saying isn't really in line with how you feel your child has been functioning or should be functioning, then that's a time to ask for more information and to possibly take that next step of maybe we need to be asking for alternative dispute resolution, going to due process, kind of taking that next step.
And maybe a step two could also be, having private assessments. We're talking about, just the district potentially doing it, but I think the uniqueness of this last year, so many parents were able to see how their children learned. And so, in the last year and a half, we were advising, listeners of our podcast to take data on the goals, right? A pre-COVID tip that we would always give was, before going to an IEP meeting, go through the goals with your kiddo as best as you can and see, can they write their name with 1 to 2 prompts without, a visual prompts or, verbal prompt, and really kind of get that test work, that sample for yourself. Obviously, the home is a different setting, yada, 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 but we would like these goals to be across all settings. Sure. So if your child has actually made progress on these goals, you as a parent should be able to see it. And I think the uniqueness of this last year has enabled parents to see it a heck of a lot more than they would have. So to help back that up, a mini step two before maybe going to an alternative dispute resolution, if you're able to be in the position to afford it, would be independent assessment. So private assessors assessing your child in these areas so that you have something of weight to bring to those ADRs.
That's really great. I think having that data for parents just for themselves is really valuable, like you said. Because if it's a skill that the kid has learned, they should be able to do it across multiple environments.
Absolutely.
But then having the assessment data on top of that, I think can really carry a lot of weight and help support parents, requests in this area of compensatory education. When would a parent know if it's time to work with an attorney like yourself? When it's time to, move forward with a due process complaint in regards to compensatory education services?
I don't think it's ever too. Oh, go ahead, Vickie.
Oh yeah, no, sorry. That's a good question. It's just the comfort level of the parent. Some parents, something happens and then they're just angry, right? So then they're Googling attorney. Sometimes it's just another parent saying, this doesn't sound right, but go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think there's a wrong time. I think that's going along with what Vickie is saying, the comfort level. We do want parents to keep in mind that there's a 2-year statute of limitations. So we are now coming up on that 2 years almost. We get to March, we will be 2 years since the start of COVID. So if there were concerns before COVID, we have a small window only to address anything before COVID. And then certainly anything that's happened during the distance learning time, you don't want to wait too long, because then you can be closing your window of, the amount for your statute of limitations. So in looking at, when, certainly if you're feeling nervous and you feel like things aren't going well and you go to that IEP meeting, and of course you can have that IEP meeting with an attorney, you can bring them to that. You don't have to wait for the IEP to bring in an attorney. But certainly if you get to that point and you start negotiating with the school district, if they start saying, hey, we want to offer you these hours, but we're going to have you sign this, that's generally a big trigger point on when you should probably consult with an attorney. Because if the school is having you sign something, you could be waiving claims and you could be leaving things on the table that your child could otherwise be receiving and maybe needs.
Wow. So you don't want to miss those opportunities. Parents, I hope you're listening here. If it gets to a point where a school district or your IEP team is saying, yes, we'll provide this as long as you don't ask for this anymore, or, you're waiving things, and that's definitely a time where you may consider contacting a special education attorney. We have 2 wonderful ones here today. And then parents, again, if you're watching us live, feel free to add your questions to the comment section as we are wrapping up here in our topic, compensatory education. So another one of my final questions is, what are some of the options? I know you talked a little bit about this briefly in the beginning. What are some of the options that parents can access if they if the school is found negligible and the child does receive compensatory education services? What can that look like?
So we had kind of outlined it could be in the form of educational services, or it could be in the form of reimbursement. So educational services are just that. So any type of reading intervention. So you have some of these bigger companies like your Linda Mubel's, SOA Learning Center is another one that provides some form of educational therapy. If you needed to have additional speech and language services, occupational therapy services, special education, for as much as we would want it to include, punitive damages, which is kind of money back to the parent for punishment, or not the petitioner. That does not exist in special education. Right. But we do see a lot of it. We are only able to, a parent leaves work and, the loss of wages and, all these things that do happen to a lot of families. Unfortunately, the law does not indicate that we can receive anything for that. So we're really dealing with that type of educational service, or if the parent provided the services on their own, it would be a form of reimbursement. That is one of the ways that you will see parents receive a lump sum of money. It's not a lump sum because they went through this pain and suffering, right, like you would see in a personal injury case or car accident case, but it's, well, we're setting aside this amount for you to get your own services for this reading intervention issue that you see, or something like that.
That's really good to know. Go ahead.
I was just saying, and just like services should be individualized, compensatory education needs to be individualized as well. So even though we do see a lot of school districts offering tutoring type services, special academic instruction, as something that they offer for compensatory education, that's not always going to be appropriate for that student, because you want to look at where was the loss, where was the regression. Academically might have been okay this year for some students, but the social, mental health, occupational therapy. All of this speech therapy might have been the areas that we regressed. We really want to look at each of the areas that regressed and work on getting that child back to that place. So it might be that we're adding additional speech therapy sessions. Maybe the IEP says 30 minutes a week. So now we're going to do, an hour a week. So it can really be a number of things based on what that child needs. Some students are being placed in private schools or non-public schools because the regression has been so severe. And so reimbursement or a transfer to these schools can also be a form of compensatory education. It's not limited to like an hour by hour comparison. We missed 20 hours over the course of the year, so we're going to give you 20 hours because, again, going back to bringing them back to where they should have been isn't necessarily going to work, because we know that if a child misses 20 hours of speech therapy, not only are they not where they should have been, but they've regressed. So we need to get them back to the point where they started and then to the progress that they should have made.
And Amanda touched on something that I wanted to just elaborate on as well, because I had indicated a private company like Lindenau Bell. Compensatory education can be provided by the school district, like Amanda mentioned. Maybe we're adding another half hour into the IEP, or it can be done by a non-public agency. And that's just a fancy term for a private agency that is certified by the California Department of Education. So when you're looking at different types of companies, if they have a non-public agency designation, districts are more often likely to reimburse a parent if they go there, or even provide the non-public, contract with the non-public agency, because there's only so many school hours in a day. So maybe the child will need it on the weekend or after school. And so it just depends on the situation. Sometimes I like the school district to be providing the tutoring because it's with the teacher after school, easy peasy. Sometimes it needs to be a private agency because it needs to be that kind of one-to-one in the student's home to help with homework or whatever.
Yeah. Wonderful options. I think that parents hope that you're picking up on this, that there are just a variety of options because it's individualized, just like you said, just like the IEP process should be. One of my final questions is in regards to that. I was just going to touch on non-public agencies or non-public schools. I know that there are times where parents will say, my kid just can't learn at this public school. They've tried everything and my kid is just not learning. And you're saying that potentially compensatory education services could be used in that regard. The school is obviously not able to provide this child with FAPE, but this private special education school agency is able to do that. You're saying that through compensatory education, possibly through the due process, they may have access to that or reimbursement for that?
Yes, because, when we look at what the student should be entitled to for compensatory education, if we add that to the already existing IEP, there's only so many hours in the day. It may not be possible for that student to receive all of that at the public school because there's not as many hours. If the student were to go to a private school that is designed for kids with special needs or a non-public school, they may be able to serve the needs of the student, get them back to where they should have been without the need for extended hours in the school day, without their needing, we see for middle school and high school students, schools will say, okay, well, we'll give you the compensatory education during the school day, but it's going to take the form as an elective. Well, that's punitive for the child. Then they're not allowed to have an elective that's discriminatory for the student with the disability because they should have a right to an elective. So we don't want to take that away. We don't want to cram their day, and we don't want them to have an extended day, having to have hours after the school or on the weekend, summer, right? So if we can build a program that's going to meet all their needs at another school, then that can be appropriate, one, for the IEP team to offer, but then certainly through a negotiation, through a settlement agreement, it can either take the form of the school district funding directly or parents receiving reimbursement.
That's so great. Well, this has just been wonderful. I'd love for you guys to share more. If we have parents who are having questions, they are maybe at this space where they're looking to work with an attorney, how can they contact you? And tell us more about what you guys are doing in your company.
Yeah, so we're Inclusive Education Project. We are a nonprofit, and we actually have a couple different departments. So one of them obviously is the legal branch, where Amanda and I provide yearly services to clients where we're attending IEP meetings, and just kind of have a little bit more control, if you will, of, are we filing? Are we not? Sometimes the parents want to do an ADR. And then the other service that we offer is the filing, just the straight up filing of a complaint. And then another department of our nonprofit is the Inclusive Education Project podcast. As you can tell, Amanda and I love to talk. And so we started a podcast 4 years ago, and we discuss various topics. So we do tips and tricks, kind of similar to what we're talking about today. Sometimes we'll have guests on, and we've learned so much and have grown so much, because there's only so much time for us in our lives to know everything about special education. And although we're very involved, it's so refreshing to have people that are passionate just like you, Crystal, to be able to talk to. So those are the different kind of ways. And then Amanda, you want to say how they can contact us?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, www.inclusiveeducationproject.org. And there is a contact where we get it, and we can give you a call to set up a consultation. We also receive messages on our Instagram, our Facebook. We have a Facebook group as well, all under Inclusive Education Project. And we do provide both what we call pro bono and low bono legal aid. So for those families that do qualify, we are able to provide pro bono services. As well as our low bono is low cost services for the families that don't qualify for pro bono. It's all flat rate fees to provide services both at IEP meetings and filing due process complaints. And then you can also give us a call at 714-899-3330. We're always willing to, set aside a time to do a consultation, talk with you. And, if you're interested in just learning more tips, follow us on Instagram, listen to our podcast. As much as that's not straight legal advice, it's not the same as hiring an attorney. We do try to provide as much information for the families as possible.
This is wonderful. You guys are such a valuable resource to families. I would ask if you are supporting families throughout the state, or do you have a special area? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so throughout the state, pre-COVID, we went throughout the state, and obviously post-COVID, it's just been so much easier for us to actually attend IEP meetings virtually. Yeah, so all throughout the state of California, we do service.
Awesome. All right, families. So again, our topic today has been compensatory education. Where are we now? And it sounds as though that there are many of us as special needs parents who may have children who have regressed to the degree that compensatory education services may be an area to consider. And we've talking about this with your IEP team. Just, flat out asking them if they, what are they going to do in regards to compensatory education for your child. Also, potentially having resolution meetings that might be able to help in resolving that. And then lastly, of course, you always can access a special education attorney like Amanda or Vickie, who can help you along your journey there in regards to comp ed. So again, ladies, thank you so much for being here. I really value your time and what you offer to families.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And parents, always know that you're going to be okay and your child is going to be okay too. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.